everyone. Dr. Jen from Wellness in 2 Words here. For those of you who are new to my page, a little background is I'm a board certified emergency physician who had been in practice for 20 years. I'm also currently now a hospice medical director, and I am passionate about wellness, and the purpose of this page is to kind of give you information so that you can make smart choices about your health. For those of you who have been subscribing or who have been following my page, thank you so much. I appreciate the support. I've got like 500 people who follow me. So again, I'm very grateful for that. One of the things that I want to do is engage you so that you tell me kind of what is beneficial for you in terms of information on this page. So I kind of tend to follow Corona topics. I've tried to do some wellness topics. I want to get more aggressive about just putting content out there. So what content would help you would be very beneficial to me. So leave a comment below. You can go to my YouTube channel and subscribe there, have the notification bell if I have a new video. It's been a bit since I've done a video. We've had a lot going on here, but let's get started because there's quite a few little updates here. So there's going to be less reference articles in this. This is just going to be more like an update kind of tone for this. So the wellness in 2 words phrase today is be skeptical. Now, I know that sounds kind of strange, but I'm asking you to be skeptical in the information that you share. There seems to be a lot of incorrect, irresponsible sharing of information these days when it comes to the pandemic. So I feel like one of your biggest responsibilities as a consumer of information is to make sure that you're sharing responsibly. If you're unsure, one of my guidelines is if it has a political agenda, I consider that biased and tainted information, and I go on to the next thing. I'm sticking with science. I'm sticking with research. Because I think that is at least one of the havens where where it's not highly politicized. So think about your sourcing when you share videos and information. So update on COVID, we have nearly 1 million deaths globally. We have approximately 200,000 domestically, which means we're responsible for 20% of the deaths in the world, which is kind of sobering. There are plenty of active cases out there that are undeclared. And some states on American soil are just now feeling the true effects of a first wave. So we're also seeing some evidence of reinfections. Now, granted, that's not widespread or determined just yet. So, just hold on to your horses for that. And those reinfections appear to be less severe, which is encouraging. So, that's just something to think about. Case positivity rates in the United States are not less than 5%, which would indicate that we have some measure of control over the virus. And then you have to factor in the lag time of cases, people who are pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic with spread who are positive, then they declare they're positive. There's a lag time of reporting, and then there's also a lag time in hospitalizations and deaths. So if you see an increase in the incidence of cases, you always have to factor in at least a month out for the death rate to hospitalization and then death rate to spike. And of course, everyone's, trying to socially distance. It's really hard. We just had Labor Day. A lot of people had get-togethers, and just really be thoughtful about how you do those things. I can't really think of a weirder fall that I've ever experienced, having never been through a pandemic as a physician. This is very strange. And I would say definitely, prepare yourselves for a long winter. People have been able to have a haven outside. They can, socially distance easier outside. When you're in an enclosed space, there's higher potential for transmission, regardless of whether or not you're wearing a mask. So I think we're going to see an uptick in cases for the winter, which is unfortunate. We're currently in a position where the reason why I haven't done some videos lately is because we are homeschooling, which has been very interesting. It's also been good, and I'll do a separate video on my thoughts on homeschooling. You're stronger and smarter than you think as a parent, so I would not tell people to just throw in the towel on that. You'd be surprised how beneficial it can be for you and your kids. Although socialization is a concern, still, you'd be surprised how it can still be a good thing. We also are fostering or adopting a pregnant cat that I rescued. So we've been just busy. We've been busy as a family. And if you go to my Facebook page on my profile, I actually have a public post where I did a cat maternity shoot just for fun. So you can go take a look at that. One thing that is interesting of note is when we talk about animal transmission versus people, they recently I saw that they had cats that they found were in Wuhan were positive for antibodies against coronavirus. They had antibodies up to 110 days, which is about 4 months. They did say that there was no live virus detected. The cats were asymptomatic. I'm not even sure why they tested cats, but I would say that from what they could tell, it was more human to cat transmission, potentially cat to cat. I would argue that you are far more social than your cat because some of these were domestic cats that were not, outdoor cats. So don't abandon your pets just because you think they can give you coronavirus, because chances are you're going to give your pet coronavirus, not the other way around. Be responsible, spay and neuter your pets. She's a lovely cat, but she probably had 6 kittens on the way that didn't need to happen. So that's an aside. Let's get back to coronavirus. Okay, one other thing that's also encouraging going into the winter is that South Korea apparently is in the process of making a combined flu COVID test. So when you look at trying to eliminate trying to diagnose the reason for a person's, malaise, fever, respiratory symptoms, those kind of things. Initially, early in this pandemic, they were like, oh, they had the flu, and they would stop. They weren't realizing it could potentially be COVID because we know there's potential for co-infections. So I think if someone has those symptoms and you test positive for the flu, don't stop there. Continue to also test for COVID until we have a reliable combined test, because that'll be important to know if you have both. There have been plenty of cases where people actually had both flu and COVID. So that's important. Don't let your doctor just stop with a flu swab. If you're concerned that it's COVID, then definitely press for a test. And the other thing going into the winter and the fall, if you have been putting off an elective procedure or dental work or routine cleanings, anything like that that's routine, I would encourage you to get that scheduled now if possible. Dentists had to shut down initially because we weren't sure in terms of protection and behavior. A lot of them now are reopening for routine cleanings and care, which is important. You need those. And they've even had to institute some surcharges on that because they're having to pay for more equipment and more things, which I think is totally fair. But if they were to have to shut down again and go back to just emergency care, then you will have not gotten your routine health care. So anything routine or anything elective, take this opportunity to get that scheduled now before we head into the winter, because those things could be canceled again, and then you would be in a situation where you can't get what you need. So, all right. So let's talk about case counts. If we're talking about the infamous 6% viral information that was kind of out there, let me just address that from a physician's perspective. There have been lots of other people who've kind of educated people about that, debunked it, if you will. So first of all, let me just say right now, I fill out a lot of death certificates on a frequent basis. I'm not incentivized for that, and I don't chart fraudulently. So I think anybody who does that, that's unethical. And if somebody has a pending COVID test at the time of death, I wait to complete that until we have that information. But I will say, in general, that's not been a significant portion of my cases. So the 6% referred to the CDC saying that on those death certificates, COVID was the only condition leading to death. Like, in other words, COVID was the only cause of death. Nothing else was filled out. Now, that tells me people were filling them out incorrectly. On no one have I said just they died and then COVID and that's it. Like 2 lines of information and that's it. That's being irresponsible. The purpose of a death certificate is so that when they look at the cause of death, you have all the information. You can kind of connect the dots and put it together of why this person died. So that the circumstances aren't mysterious. They're not, if they're young and you have no idea why they died, obviously that's going to prompt a medical examiner case, an autopsy potentially, just because it didn't make sense. Like, why would they die? So let me kind of walk you through a death certificate and how they're structured, because it's important for you to understand where that number came to be. Because 6% is, I think it's just a weird number. it shouldn't even be 6% of people that had cardiopulmonary arrest or respiratory failure and then COVID. Like, COVID causes death because of the effects it has on the body physiologically. So what were those effects? What were the things that led to their death? Was it sepsis? Was it pneumonia? Was it they couldn't oxygenate? Like, so many other questions I have. So let me look. This is an example of the Tennessee death certificate. They've now gone to an electronic system. However, this is what a death certificate used to look like when it was all just paper. So you see down here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, where it says immediate cause of death, and then it has contributing causes of death, and then down here, comorbid factors. So, if you didn't get a good look at that, take another good look because I'm going to put this up. So, for me, the definition of death is when your heart stops or you stop breathing, right? So, to put for the immediate cause of death, cardiorespiratory arrest is, it's redundant. That's the definition of death. And I would encourage you to go get a family member's death certificate if you have access to that, if you want to take a look at that as well. So they've been encouraging physicians to be very precise in how we fill out death certificates, just because that is important information. So if someone comes in and they have respiratory failure, they can't oxygenate their blood for whatever reason, their lungs are not functioning, they can't exchange air because of some tissue damage, I would put as their primary cause of death acute hypoxemic respiratory failure. That's why. They can't get enough oxygen. They can't they can't carry out the process of respiration in order to sustain life. So now why? Did they have pneumonia? Did they have too much fluid in their lungs, like pulmonary edema? Did they have inflammation or acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is what we see with COVID? Many reasons why you can't oxygenate your blood. If someone has heart failure and it's like a giant wet sponge and it's all fluid, they will die of acute hypoxemic respiratory failure. Now, did they happen to have COVID at the same time? Maybe, maybe not. COVID alone doesn't just immediately precipitate death. We know that it's causing thrombotic events like strokes. We know that it can cause, can be implicated in platelet dysfunction and causing heart attacks. It can cause myocarditis, which is damage to the actual heart tissue where it's very inflamed and doesn't function and conduct electricity. So there are many reasons why COVID will precipitate death. But in filling out the death certificate, I would walk that back and say they couldn't breathe, respiratory failure, or they were not able to circulate their blood well because they had hypovolemic shock, because they had sepsis and circulatory collapse, and the sepsis was due to the infection, which was pneumonia, which was precipitated by the viral infection of COVID. So when you look at those numbers, just remember that I think that's somebody who's trying to distort the facts and confuse the public, and frankly, I'm tired of it. Just tired of it. Anyway, it's the last thing we need. Like, we need reliable information. So confusing the situation doesn't help. The other thing to factor in is excess deaths. We know for a fact that there are more deaths than predicted or expected for this year. So could that be because we have uncounted COVID cases? Could it be because of the counted COVID cases? Could it also be because people aren't going to the hospital to get treatment for other things because they're scared they'll get COVID? All of that is involved. So when you look at excess deaths, remember, you're counting those heart attacks that didn't go for treatment. You're counting the people who stayed home with maybe their appendicitis because they didn't want to go to the hospital because they were scared, and then they ruptured, they had peritonitis and died of sepsis. You're factoring all of those things in. But definitely the excess death rate is consistent with the fact that we're in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, and a lot of people are dying much more than they would have that was predicted. And math is math. Math doesn't change unless you have some large external force like we did in this pandemic. Let me see. I think that's all I wanted to say about the 6%. Oh yeah, the other thing too is for people to say, oh, well, they died of diabetes, right? Diabetes, hypertension, those are all chronic conditions. So again, to say, well, they had comorbidities and that's why they died. Last I checked, a lot of diabetics can live for a very long time with controlled diabetes. However, it does affect their immune system. They're immunocompromised. They don't fight off infections as well. So when you do get an infection, it is a precipitating event. And so it would be the reason why you died, because you weren't going to die otherwise. So to say, oh, comorbidities, that's why they died, is kind of a nonsense statement. It doesn't really take into account the big picture of what was the precipitating event that caused the cascade of events that led to their death. So I hope that makes sense. Now, let's talk about vaccines. Yay. I'm sure everybody's like, great. Let's just pick a more controversial topic. So again, I'm somewhat of a skeptic, but I want to explain to you where we are with therapies and such. So first of all, there aren't a lot of current therapies that, there's nothing that's curative for COVID right now, okay? We're still in that situation of we have a lot of good supportive care. We have more information about supportive care. We know that waiting to put somebody on a ventilator until later is helpful. We know that in severe cases, ECMO can be helpful, which is, I could do a whole other video about that, but it's extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. It basically is like a bypass machine so that you can oxygenate someone's blood since their lungs don't function well. There are very few of those machines available nationwide, and so it's kind of a last-ditch effort for a lot of people. It can be helpful, but usually when someone goes on ECMO, their chances are pretty slim of surviving. So knowing that the therapies are limited, steroids do help. They do help decrease mortality. Vitamin D is actually coming out as something that, as a supplement, it helps improve outcomes. Remdesivir still, we're not sure. Remdesivir, why did I say? I don't know. Remdesivir is still kind of a little helpful, but it's not a silver bullet. So keep in mind that therapies are not crazy effective at this time, if that makes any sense. So let's talk about the whole idea of herd immunity in a vaccine, because if you go back to my earlier videos, I had said when we get a vaccine, we'll be in better shape. It's basically flattening the curve, social distancing, all of these core measures are to buy us time to get to the point where we can get a safe, effective vaccine. And when we have a safe, effective vaccine, it is something that I will consider taking for sure and consider having my family vaccinated. But that hinges on a lot of good information about safety and efficacy that is not tainted and not biased. Okay, my kids have been vaccinated. There are certain things that I strongly believe in vaccines against. Formulation of the vaccine is going to be the key for safety. So let me explain kind of how a vaccine works. So you can have the definition of an antigen is a protein, a sugar, or something, a molecule that binds with an antibody. Okay, antigen, antibody. We talk about antigen, antibody complexes in science all the time. Antigens don't always elicit an immune response, right? So not every antigen is going to cause an immune response. Sometimes it's too small. Sometimes it doesn't trigger the right machinery, whatever. An immunogen is an antigen that triggers an immune response. So, for instance, this is going to get kind of tricky, but there are little things called haptens, small proteins, small molecules. Penicillin is a classic hapten. Many people are not allergic to penicillin. There are a few people who are allergic to penicillin, and they're highly allergic to penicillin. It means once upon a time, they were exposed to penicillin, and it bound to a protein that was large enough and weird enough that their immune system was like, wait a minute, what is this? And it elicited an immune response. Because not everybody who gets penicillin has a reaction. Certain people who, that hapten, that penicillin molecule, again, was combined with a larger protein to get your immune system's attention. So the whole idea of a vaccine is you may take something very small that on its own may or may not elicit an immune response, but you're going to combine it with something called an adjuvant, which enhances that immune response and makes your body aware of it. So it's like, look over here. This isn't good. We need to attack this. There are different formulations of them. Some of them come from lipopolysaccharides, which are bacterial molecules. Like the Shingrix vaccine, I was looking that up. It's for herpes zoster, for shingles. It's composed of plant saponins, which are certain molecules that are plant based, and also lipopolysaccharides. So those things naturally will probably elicit an immune response when you put them together in vaccine, combined with the viral particles for varicella zoster. Then you elicit the immune response that you want, which is targeted for shingles. Other formulations include aluminum salts, which is kind of the thing that's been controversial. Is it connected to Alzheimer's? Does it cause more problems than the benefit of the vaccine? Those are questions that are for another time. But when you look at vaccine formulations, that's stuff you have to think about. So you have the thing that you want to elicit the response. You have to combine it with an adjuvant, which enhances the immune response and makes it more significant, so that you get T cell interaction. So you get B cells that make more antibodies, that kind of like all of it just gets, it starts that whole cascade of events to get your immune system 100% on board with figuring it out. Now, other ways to formulate a vaccine are to have it heat killed, irradiated, something where the virus is basically killed and inactive, right? Or the bacteria, so that when you put it in a person, it doesn't cause the disease. It's killed, dead, ineffective. It's just like if you had a flower, you preserve the flower, say in glycerin or something. It still looks just as beautiful, it looks just as great, but it's still very dead. It still looks like a flower. You're going to be like, that's a flower. You know what it is. So same idea of it's recognizable. It doesn't change the structure of it, but it is inactive and it can't do anything. Versus weakened viruses, like attenuated viruses, such as the one for measles, the MMR. That's a live vaccine. It can make a stronger response. It is a weakened virus, but people can have effects like they're slightly sick from it, right? Measles is one of the most contagious diseases on the planet. So vaccinating against measles, I think, is a very important decision to make, because its R naught is like 18. One person can infect like 18 people and perpetuate the disease. That's crazy. Coronavirus is 2.5. So when you think about highly contagious diseases that are also very deadly, measles can cause encephalitis, meningococcemia can cause death and sepsis. Those things I think it's very important to consider a vaccine against because of their contagion capability and the severity of the disease that they cause. There are also vaccines that are toxoid vaccines. So the most common one for that's going to be tetanus. Tetanus is one of the things that people get a tetanus shot. It's against the toxoid, which causes the reaction in your body. So they basically neutralize that before it has any effects. And then recombinant vaccines, which basically says you're going to hijack the machinery of, say, a yeast, a virus, or something, and get it to make the proteins that you want it to, so that you have plenty of them to elicit an immune response. So when we talk about herd immunity, keep in mind herd immunity is a phrase that is specific more for vaccines. It's not to say, hey, let's have a wild type novel virus just blaze its way through the population and see how many people survive it. That would lead to an unacceptable number of fatalities, deaths that could have been prevented. So again, flattening the curve, keeping your distancing. It's to buy time for a vaccine that is safe enough that when enough people take it, not everybody would have to take it, but when enough people in the population take it, then the virus it shrinks that pool of susceptible hosts. So if you have a circle of 10 people, 6 out of the 10 have gotten vaccinated, and then you have a virus with an R naught of 2.5, you've got maybe 4 people of that. Maybe those people have already been exposed to it potentially or whatever. So the pool of susceptible hosts that can perpetuate the virus shrinks, which is when you get that bending of the curve down where fewer people get sick from it and it kind of just stays in a smaller realm. It's not a pandemic anymore, if that makes any sense. Okay, so we're waiting on the FDA, which I will say, I applaud the FDA. Recently, they released a letter of their intent saying that they will not be pressured by politics or by other undue influences, where they will keep their integrity, and I hope they do what they say, keep their integrity to formulate a safe vaccine. Their primary concern is for the American people, the American people's safety and health and well-being. And until it is safe and proven to be safe, it will not be approved. Forever amen. I hope that is the truth. Now, keep in mind, the FDA's job is to work with safety in formulation and approval of substances. There have been concerns about the FDA and overreach in the past. However, this is one opportunity that they could shine. The CDC is responsible for the execution and delivery of the approved vaccine once the FDA approves it. So hopefully everybody will do their job as they're supposed to and behave accordingly and not let this get further politicized. I'm going to be really curious to see what the world vaccine efforts are and how other countries do it as well. That's going to be super important. Now, one thing to note is AstraZeneca had a trial in progress that was recently halted because one of the patients had a severe episode of what's called transverse myelitis. How much of that was attributed to the vaccine yet? That's what they were like, stop the trial. We need to figure this out and see, is it because of the vaccine or is it because of something else that this person had happen, or do they have some susceptibility to it, etc. So let me explain what transverse myelitis is in case you wanted to know. Transverse myelitis is an inflammatory disorder of the spinal cord. So if somebody came in with symptoms of a spinal cord level, say they had incontinence or urinary retention, or they had numbness from the waist down, or they had weakness of their legs, or something that you're like, that's so weird. Why would it just be there? It doesn't act like a stroke. What is it? One of the things to consider would be transverse myelitis. You would diagnose it with an MRI. You would also diagnose it with blood work to see, do they have inflammatory changes like an elevated CRP or a SED rate, things like that to make you go, what the heck is going on? It is typically symmetric, which means it's not patchy like multiple sclerosis, where you have destruction of the myelin sheath on the nerves. This is more acute, inflammatory, symmetric, spinal cord based. So they honed in on this pretty quickly with this individual, from what I can tell. They halted the trial. They're kind of like dialing back to say, okay, is this because of the vaccine, or did they have some genetic or health predisposition to an inflammatory neurologic disorder? Now, when they ultimately decide that the vaccine trial is still safe, they'll continue. But the problem is transverse myelitis often isn't reversible. It can be reversible, depending on how quickly it's diagnosed and treated. And so you don't want somebody to have a permanent disability because of a vaccine. That would be unacceptable. Okay, I think that's it for today. That's a lot of information. I just want you to keep in mind, case counts are still coming. I still feel like they're counted appropriately, no matter what other people say. I mean, there's been so much smoke and mirrors around all that, misinformation, who's in control of what or whatever. I would trust your local health authorities to be doing accurate reporting on the state and local level, for sure. Tracking the CDC rates. I mean, we're seeing this roller coaster. We're still on an upward slope. So who knows where we're going to level out for the winter. So just some final thoughts and I'm going to be done. This is a long video. Keep supporting your local businesses. Stay positive. Stay connected. So local businesses still need your business. We're coming into what would normally be a really good season for them in terms of profit. People shop for Christmas. There's lots of holidays. We're going to try to figure out how to do trick-or-treating from a distance. I saw this great thing about making a candy chute in your front yard. So you just put the candy down there and the kids catch it on the end. That sounds awesome. So I might show you a picture of that. I'm going to continue to donate blood. I'm overdue to donate. And one of the good things is Medic actually is most centers are testing people for antibodies. I have not had a coronavirus test yet. I haven't had any symptoms or any reason to, and I've been distancing pretty appropriately. So I don't feel like I'm potentially putting other people at risk. But if I donate blood and find out I have antibodies, that could be really interesting because that's food for thought. Stay healthy metabolically, and there will be more videos I'm going to post about being healthy from a metabolic standpoint. Eat plenty of fat. Eliminate carbs or restrict your carbs quite a bit. Don't eat your Halloween candy. So, and I would say things that I really want, like on my Christmas wish list, I would love to have a reliable, easy home COVID test, kind of like a pregnancy test, if you will, although some people still can't read those correctly, so whatever, but that you could swab at home and know if you're infectious or not, that it would be inexpensive, reliable, easy to take. That would be like the best Christmas present ever, because then you could do your own self quarantining, monitoring. That would really, I think, put information in the hands of people where it needs to be so that they can make appropriate choices to help people. So on that note, thanks for watching. Remember, share, subscribe. I appreciate you listening. Please engage and tell me what topics you want to see or hear, and happy fall. Have a great weekend. Thanks.